Welcome to the Elokus podcast. This is class number 3 in the discourse Mimana, Afar Yakov, which is the 8th discourse in the overall book of Shagdimu 5672. This is again class number 3 in the 8th discourse Mimana. It's the third class in chapter 29, Perek Chavtes. Okay. So what he's explaining over here in this chapter is the explanation of how could such abstract lights enter and become unified with the vessels, which vessels are limited and the lights are infinite. So therefore we explained how even in the origins of the light has already a very subtle, hidden, and non-expressed already beginning of somethingness, beginning of limitation or definition. It's just that when the lights are in the infinite light, it is utterly not seen and not known and not felt as something separated. But then they're all unified with each other. They're all one. They're all one with the infinite. But then through the process of the tzimtzumim, the two contractions, and what we're concerning over here primarily is the second contraction, which limits the lights, which already brings forth the lights in a more detectable manner, so that the lights have somewhat a, as he calls it, the words he uses, we learned yesterday, mitzios nikeres. They have already an existence that can already be recognized. You can already feel and sense the chachma that's in the chachma, the bina that's in the bina of the light, the chesed, the gevura. They can subtly be sensed, but that itself, but over there in that stage, since there's still a continuation of the Or Ein Sof in the sense that the way they came into existence is b'derech miut, which means in a manner of reduction, not in a manner of siluk. So the helem, the concealment of it, is still felt over there, and therefore, I'm sorry, not the concealment, the pshitus, the simplicity of it is still felt. So the lights are still very high and very pashut. We're going to see that on this level, we see their esesphira is belima. They don't really have a substance. But then, at least, so much, since these lights are already in a metzios nikeres, they're already in a recognizable state, albeit in a very subtle way, but they're recognized already as differences. They can now settle in the vessels. When they settle in the vessels, then the vessels are going to absorb them and then bring forth and draw forth the limitation that's in the light much more, because the vessel is going to add to the limitation and to the constriction or limit, or the limiting element of the light, the design of the light. And then the lights are going to become very much like the vessels. And the words he uses over here is they're going to become b'mitzios davar. They're going to become something. Light of Chachma. It's not going to be esesphira is bali ma. It's not going to be without any ma. It's very interesting according to that. The concept of esesphira is bali ma, that they don't have any substance, is when the light is still above the vessels. Once the light, according to the Pirush over here at least, it could be in other places, he learns differently, but according to the Pirush over here, the esesphira is bali ma, without any substance, is the oiros, when they're already emanated. So you can call them esespheres. They're not esespheres agnuzais. They're not concealed in their source. They're already projected, but because they haven't settled in the vessels yet, they're still without substance. The words he uses very, very delicate words. Mitzios nikeres. They're an existence that is recognized, but not yet mitzios davar, not yet a mitzios of something. But when the light goes into the vessels already affect the lights to turn those lights into real Metzios. Metzios what? Chachma becomes Chachma, and Bina becomes Bina, Chesed becomes Chesed, Gevura becomes Gevura, as he's now going to further and explain in today's class. And he's going to start now something that he's going to continue throughout the chapter, and that is to formulate it as 3 stages in the light. The origins of the light, when the esespheres are still in their, when they are in their place of birth, if we might say, which is still in the Or Ein Sof. That happens in the Alos HaRatzon, when there is a will rises in the Ein Sof, or as he also referred to it as Hashara Ba'alma, as a estimation, where his desire is laher bigvul, to illuminate in a limited fashion. But it's still happening in the infinite mind, in the infinite energy, in the infinite light, a desire to illuminate within certain structure. So that already creates the preconditioning of the light, but it's not all the spheres are perfectly one in this state, and they're all embedded and lost in the Or Ein Sof. We also refer to this level of Malchus of Ein Sof, but while it's still part of the Ein Sof. Then there is the Tzimtzum, which leads us to the second stage, which is the projection of the Kav, which really means the Oirais are coming out, but without vessels, just the pure lights, where over here they're already becoming Begiloi, and once they're becoming more Begiloi, they're going more into a state of expression, self-expression of who they are, each sphere on its own, and also the idea that they became differentiated. And then later, that's stage number 2. Stage number 3 is when they go into vessels. So now let's see. In general, Yesh Gimel Madregois, 3 levels ba'oros in the lights. Madrega Echad, one the first level of them, and oros k'moishim klulim ba'or Ein Sof. The lights when they are still included in the Or Ein Sof. Baruch lifnei atzimtzum, before the tzimtzum. And Esas Spheres Agnuzos b'matzilon. These are the 10 spheres that are still ganuz. They are still hidden b'matzilon in the emanator. In other words, you don't sense emanations. All you sense is the emanator, which is the Or Ein Sof. And the emanations are completely included, absorbed, and one with him. Shalzen Omar. Now on this it says, Antu chad v'loy b'chushban. In the statement that it says in Pasach Elio, which is a statement of Zohar, which in Tikunei Zohar, which comes from Elijah the prophet, and it's a traditional teaching going back to Eliyahu Hanavi, in which he revealed, I guess, to Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, or exactly who he revealed it to, I'm not sure, but it becomes part of the Zohar. In any case, and over there it says, starts, Eliyahu began, Antu chad, you are one, Rabbi Nolman, the master of the world, Antu chad, you are one, v'loy b'chushban, and not in any calculative way. You can't be enumerated, you can't be counted. So he says this phrase, Antu chad v'loy b'chushban, is referring to the Eser Spheros when they are in a hidden state. In other words, higher than the Eser Spheros, in the Or Ein Sof itself, as it is Spheros Ein Kates, as it is just pure, you don't have to say Antu chad, you're one. Because you don't have to negate any. Of course it's one, there's nothing else over there. Antu chad is because the Chiddush over here, the novelty is that even though there is 10, it's still one. That it's saying there's no count because there's no 10, there's only one. Oh, there's 10 spheres, yeah, but they're all one. And he's going to explain that idea. He's going to explain that type of oneness, which is referring to this level. The Pirish Chad, over here, when we say that Antu Chad, you are one, P'chinas Yachid. Yachid meaning absolutely one. Yachid be'etzem, he's essentially one. But the very fact that you have to say that he's Yachid means Shema Yuchad Mamish Ba'or Ein Sof, that all the 10 spheres are perfectly and completely unified with the Or Ein Sof. And even the 10 spheres that are there are in the epitome of unity. Let's for a moment, in order to keep the flow going, let's for a moment skip the parentheses and come to the word in other words, to explain that this is what it means, Yachid. The Yachid means essentially one. What does he want with that? What does it mean non-essentially one? Because there's another type of oneness, which is also one, but not essentially one. So what does that mean? That's the word Echad. When you say Echad, it's a far lesser oneness. And he's going to explain the difference between Yachid and Echad. And that's why he's going to say that only on this level can you say Yachid, can you say Chad? He says Antu Chad. What the Zohar says, Antu Chad, you are one, it's the same like the Zohar is using Aramaic. It's the same like in Hebrew, the word Yachid. It's as if it would say, Antu Atahu Yachid, you are one. Like it says elsewhere, the difference between Echad and Yachid. The Echad, one, who is Achdus HaPratim, is when many things are, you say they are Am Echad, they are one people. So you have a lot of people, all types of people, tall people, short people, Smart people, not so smart people. Kind people, not such kind people, right? It's the more, whatever, all kind. Redheads, people with black hair, white hair, old, young, men, women, like every type of person. It's all one nation. So it's the oneness of here is a unity, like you say, Mika Amcha Yisroel, Goy Echad. They're a nation of oneness because they're all unified as one. That's Echad. They're all, like you say, all part of one system. Right? When many parts come together to form one, it's one. I know Mashanasa Echad, they become one. It's like you take a bunch of copies. You have photo copies, or and then you put them all in order, in the right order, and then you bind it. It becomes one book. So it's many different pages. Each page is different, but they're all part of one book. Like this. They become one. It's like a unification after there has been already many, and they all come together as one. After things have already been differentiated and separated, that means even something that once was in a state of a higher oneness, but then after that oneness separates, and the details come forth, and each one becomes independent, kind of separated from the other. When you gather it back together into the oneness, it's called back one. It's like having a Lego, a helicopter or a ship built from Lego pieces. It's one. Then you go and all those pieces are broken and separated into different pieces. They're not one. It's all one part of one Lego set, but it's not really, you don't see the oneness. Then you construct all these Legos back again, you have one. That's what he's saying over here. When everything goes back into its source, and they will become, the Lego is not so much a source, but we'll see in a moment what this refers to as a source. Then they become reunified. This is how the details are now in a state of oneness. And he gives a very interesting example for that. But this is all a weaker kind of oneness. Because even when it's one, it's like it's you can feel that there are many things together that have returned to oneness. So, for example, the luchos, the someone told me that in a certain experience, out of body experience, very interesting story I just heard yesterday, which I'm not going to relate over here. But someone told me they merited an experience where they had a near death experience, a whole story. And they vividly described a visit to a spiritual Beis Hamikdash. And in that experience, they saw the Holy Ark and they saw two sets of luchot, two sets of tablets. And one of them was tablets of the Ten Commandments. They could see literally, you could see the letters of fire floating inside. It was like awesome. But then they saw another set of tablets. And they were wondering, why is there two sets of tablets? And this person never knew that there were two sets of tablets. It's like they were a newcomer, new to Torah. They didn't really learn much Torah. They didn't know. It was only after this experience that they found out that there were two types of tablets. So they looked, but they noticed it. They looked. This person looked well in their dreamlike state or whatever it was. They saw that the tablets, one of those pairs, were really 10 pieces, but they were like put together, like as if it was glued together. So that idea that something, and we know that the tablets were broken and shivrei luchos, and then they come together. But there was a difference between something that was broken, that is one, or something that broke and separated, and the pieces are now put together again. And he says he gives an example in the experience in a more subtle way. Says we all have a power of movement. God gave us many powers. He gave us a power of intellect, gave us a power of experience emotions. We also have the power to see, to hear. One of the powers that we have is the power of physical movement, which is primarily, we can move all the limbs of our body mostly, but mostly it is the movement of the body are the hands and the feet. Now, if you think about human hands and human fingers, think about all the millions and millions and millions of different things you can do with it. Think about all the creative work that has been done. I mean, in general, you can You can make a certain amount of categories. But how many different types of painting strokes can be made from these very same fingers? How many different writings? What can you write? Well, every book that was written. Right? It was written, different ideas came through. The ideas are different, but the words which means that the power to move, and it's all produced through the power of movement of the hand. So let's say you have a great, great painter, an artist, a very famous artist. The moment they were born, before they started doing before they ever developed their artistic, maybe they have it in their genes. Obviously they do. They have a leaning, they have a certain talent, a latent talent, a inborn talent, but it's a silent talent. It's there to produce the different paintings. But right now, at this moment, where are all those paintings? Van Gogh, when he was born, where were all his paintings? It was all in potential, in the power of movement that he had in his hands. But they were all one, completely one. But over here, he wants to speak a much lower level of oneness, which is what? Which is after you've already painted a painting, or after you've expressed a certain movement with your hand to do a particular activity. So now you have drawn forth from the overall general sea of potential of movement. And you drew out one particular expression of it. Now, when a person rests, let's say someone who's an artist, who's in their studio, and all day long they're painting, or all day long they're carving, or whatever, every type of artist. At night, or in the evening, or when they do a lunch break, or whatever it is, they stop working. What happens? Their power of movement that was now expressing itself in all the various different strokes that they were moving their hands throughout the day, all that potential and all that power, so to speak, all those energies get drawn back into the soul. Meaning into where? Into the general station from where all movement comes from. That state, when all those movements go back in to the general station of, or the general power force from where all these particular movements come from, that's called echad. Because you can see that the power, the talent that they used in this type of painting, and the talent that they used in this type of carpentry. Let's say it's one person who's both an artist, a carpenter, and a smith. And in each one, he used different talents of his person. Some people are a know-it-all. They're just gifted in their hands. They can do anything, with their hands. So all the different things. And let's say in one day, they utilized all the different artistic talents of movement in their hand. But when they go to sleep at night, what happens to all those artistic movements? They all come back into one source, into one place. Now, if you would take a magnifying glass, so to speak, and you would amplify, go deep into that pure, simple power, you would see how in that simple power of movement sits in it the power to create carpentry, woodwork, the power to do work with silver, with smithery, what you might call, and the power, which is a different talent, and the power to write, and the power to paint, and the power to play musical instruments, to move the strokes of the finger on the delicate strokes that are needed on some kind of a string instrument, which you're using your fingers very delicately. You can see that they're all there, but they're all in a state of echad. They're all unified. It's one person with a power. It's all unified. However, because these powers were once expressed, and now you're seeing all these expressed powers as they return back into the pool from where they come from, it's like those 10 pieces of the luchot glued together back into oneness. Because it already had differentiated itself, and now it went back to its one. That's one level. That's called echad. What's yachid? Yachid is the little baby Van Gogh being born, or this talented individual, know-it-all being who knows how to, has incredible talent with his or her hands. As soon as they're born, before they've ever expressed it, it's all there in a potential, but never ever activated. So over there, it's not this power and that power. They haven't even what would be the right word? Haven't even unleashed that power yet. And it might be a potential that if they don't meet the right teacher or the right inspiration or the right person, it might go their entire lifetime dormant and a waste. What a shame. You have the greatest artist who, unfortunately, they never had the right people there to bring it forth. So I'm just saying how hidden it is and how wanted it. That's called Yachid. Yachid means it never was expressed. And therefore the oneness of all of them are much more one, as opposed to when they were already individualized and expressed in a specific way, and then going back into the source. So what he's saying is, this level of the 10 sfirot, when they are still in a level of ganuz, it's like a power of the Orein Sof that has the various different talents. God has the talent of Chachma. God has the talent of Chesed. He has the talent of... But in this state, they're all absolutely one. They've never, ever been expressed yet. It's only that we know that it will be 10 powers that will come out. So they're there, but they're not there. But they're there in a state of Yachid. That's the depth of the idea of it being Yachid. Let's go back to the Echad. Echad is what? And when they all go back by Makar and their source, then they go back into a state of Yichud. It's only a unification of the details. Like the power of movement of the hand. That when it is comes out into actuality and it goes and it produces some kind of work. When the person rests from the work, and this power that is now expanded in that particular smithery, or in that particular woodwork, or in that particular music playing of an instrument, when these powers go back back to their essence, then all these different functions that are all possible from the power of movement in the hand all go into a state of oneness. This is an isachtos. This is a unification of the detail. After they've already been drawn. It was a power unto its own. Each one was an individual power. Now it went back to into a oneness. Yachid, but Yachid is much more than that. Yachid hu shemiyuchid be'etzem. And that's why the earlier power is not called it's in essence unified. Because it's this power, it's the power of the musical movements, to move musical instrument, to play an instrument, which is different than the power of writing, which is different than the power of painting, which is different than the power of woodwork, which is different than the power of jewelry making or whatever. So each one is a different one. So they're not essentially unified. They're just going back to as long as you're still seeing the particular variations of activities, it's not called an essential oneness. She'en kan prat klal, but on a higher level is what avol yachid shem yuchid she'en kan prat klal. On the level of yachid, there's no detail at all. It's just one. Like the power of the hand. Before, in the beginning of the day, or when someone is born, they never ever move their hand to do anything with their hand. For sure, the potential is there. Because if you're going to do it later, must be it's in your hand already earlier. Everything is still in a state of the essence of the power of the hand. It's not at all in a state of existence on its own. So then the power to make a table, and the power to play an instrument, and the power to hit a ball, or to throw a basketball, or whatever it is, to score a touchdown. Every one of these powers at this point are all just a power of movement. These are not differentiatable at all. They're just in a state of oneness. It's not even a unification of details. It's just one. Because it never, ever emerged yet. And the same is also, he gave an example of movement. Same is also in the powers of the soul. When they are unified in the essence of the soul, we have 10 powers in the soul. Before the powers of the soul begin to emerge from the soul itself. So then the soul has an ability, but the powers are not yet differentiatable. It's just an apparent. And we have an example of that, where all of a person's powers are in such a state of unity where they're absolutely one. And all you have is the soul, because they're so unified with the soul. There's no beginning of expression of the power. Now, you might say a baby as soon as the baby is born, before it begins to experience intelligence and emotions. That perhaps would be the best example. But for whatever reason, he doesn't use that example. And he uses an example of seemingly, what we might argue is an example of echad, based on what he said earlier, not of yachid. Let's see his example, and then we'll analyze it. He says, it was when I learned it, I was so shocked that this would be the example. But he says in the parentheses, a tiny parentheses over here, someone is being taken out to be executed. They're on their way to the gallows. At that moment, the person is frozen. A moment the person is facing the idea that any minute they're being killed, God forbid. No one should ever know of this. At that moment, you can't feel emotion. You just feel nothing. Why? All the powers of the person got re-swallowed up because there is such a stunning, I don't know if it's a fear that grips the person, that overpowers the entire person. There's a numbness that completely, so what happens? All the powers of the soul get like sucked back up completely into, all there is just the person himself without any powers. What happens, there is seichel, there is intelligence, because it's a human being, there's emotions. But that experience is so intense that the essence of the person is rallied up, so to speak, and everything becomes elevated and absorbed in their essence of their soul. In a state of a point, without any expansion. Now this is a little strange, because this is seemingly an example of something that was expressed already. And here's a human being who had, who was the person, the big philosopher, the big Greek philosopher that was killed? I don't know why. I forgot whatever his name was. One of the early Greek philosophers. The Romans killed him. So you can't say this person had no intellect. That's the greatest intelligence of the day. He was the greatest thinker, the greatest. So I don't want to use Rabbi Akiva, for example, because Rabbi Akiva seemed to have been very, very much in control of himself while he was being taken away. Even they tortured him to death, because he then said, all my life I've been waiting for this moment. So you see, he was in a state of function. He wasn't dysfunctional. But I'm using an example of someone who was a great mind, a great thing, but because they were taking his life, I'm sure he was in a state where everything got shocked, everything got shut down. So why would this be the example? Why wouldn't he use rather the example of a child, a baby just born? Perhaps he wants to show that it is possible for things to go into a state of yachid even after they were expressed. The rule that he said earlier, that once things are expressed and detailed and then brought back into the, like at night when you go to sleep, all your power of actions, which could have been variable, yet right now those powers go back into the soul. But when they go back into the soul when you're sleeping, you can kind of still trace within the power of the soul. There is the power of this particular art or this particular action or this particular movement that is being recharged now in the charger in the soul. And this power is, the powers are still kind of, each one is still detectable. It's just they're now in a higher state, in a more unified state. But it's possible that even when energies are once expressed, but a person is in such a such a essential state of shake-up, so to speak, that the powers shut down so deeply that everything goes back to a state as if they never, ever, ever came out. That's what it seems to be saying over here. That even, in other words, it's possible for an expressed human being to go back to a state, not just of echad, but a state of yachid. At night when we go to sleep, all of our powers are in a state of echad. But it's possible, I guess, no one should know of this, to go back to a state of yachid, of absolute oneness. So this is all of an example. So this serves as the example of the 10 spheros that are ganus, that are hidden. B'matzilon, in their source, and klulim ba'atzmus, they are still in a state, they never ever were emanated. They're so unified in the essence, hamatzal of the emanator, b'pchenas yichud, in a state of unification, b'li shum mitzias la'atzmon klal, they don't have any existence to themselves at all. V'zeu antu chad, this is the state of chad, which chad, we said before, is like it says yachid. B'pchenas yachid be'etzem, in an essential state of oneness. It's not at all counted. Even though it includes in this all the 10 spheres, they don't have a number of 10. Because they're nullified. Unified and completely one with the infinite light, blessed is he. And first of all, they're unified with God himself that's above these potentials. But also they're unified with each other. Because in that place, the power, as we said earlier, before a person ever developed and expressed their variations of powers of their movement, the power of cooking and the power of baking, or the power of playing musical instruments, or the power of writing or painting or carpentry or whatever it is, they're all one. Because nothing has ever come out from this individual yet. It's one essential state of movement that includes everything. And you can't say there are 10 powers over there. So it's there, but not there. And you can't say over there a number, a counting of 10 spheres. That's the first level. There is a little parenthesis over here that I missed, and we skipped. We're going to come back. And then in tomorrow's class, we're going to start learning the second level. The level of when the spheros already emerge, how that is different than the first level. And then the next chapter, chapter 30, is where he's going to start discussing the third level, the light settling into the vessels. Okay.